Anin Kinoya, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Drew Douglas Indigenous, Chippewas of Rama Ndonjaba, Mong Dodom. Hi, everyone. My name's Drew, coming at you live and direct from Chippewas of Rama First Nation. And yeah, I am of the Loon Clan. And yeah, excited to talk to you a little bit about conflict management today. If you don't have to, but I would love it if everyone came off of or put their cameras on. I like to see who I'm talking to. It's totally cool if you're not comfortable. That's fine though. So just a couple of norms I want to set before we go. Be present. You decided to tune in, so tune in fully, right? Be here, participate, turn on your camera. That's one way to be present. That sort of ensures you won't do other things. And yeah, totally cool with anybody interrupting me at any time or throwing things in the chat. I've got it open. I can answer your questions as we go. I prefer a more conversational back and forth. So yeah, don't feel like you got to hold anything to the end or anything like that. I have a little bit of participation built in. So yeah, I want you to take space and or make space depending on your sort of personality. So if you're someone who's maybe a little more reserved, take up some space, okay? Put yourself out there, jump into the conversation, throw something in the chat. If you're someone who's maybe totally comfortable doing that sort of thing, make some space for those others, right? Wait a beat before you jump into the conversation, so to speak. So yeah, conflict management, really the whole goal is about preparation, right? We want to make sure that we're fully prepared when we're trying to manage conflict, right? So I kind of think of it like we're going on a canoe trip, okay? When we're going on a canoe trip, we want to make sure we have all the things we need to canoe safely or to be able to complete the canoe trip, such as our PFD and our paddles, right? So those are sort of our key Anishinaabe teachings. I don't know if there's any Haudenosaunee in the room, but I'm Anishinaabe, and I'm going to focus on Anishinaabe related things. And I think that's an important thing that sort of sets us apart from the westernized world when it comes to managing conflict, right? Before we hit any rapids, we should go and check them out, right? So that's your sort of assessments, right? How can you make sure that you are being preventative and mindful and able to navigate those rapids in a safe way, right? And then finally, I'm going to get to conflict de-escalation. And the real gift we have as Anishinaabe is one specific way of doing that is through collaboration. And if you've ever been in a canoe with more than one person and everybody has a paddle, I'm sure you're not going anywhere unless everybody's sort of paddling in unison, right? And everybody's working together, right? So those are sort of the three tools I want to kind of take you through this morning as we go through each of them, kind of with that lens on conflict management, right? So let's talk about Anishinaabe teachings first, and probably the most important one from a conflict management perspective is of course, our 7 grandfather teachings, right? And I'm sure most of you know these already, but from a conflict management perspective, love is about, being compassionate for other people, showing kindness, and I think that kind of shows itself when we think about managing conflicts, right? It's not about winning an argument. It's about the relationship between two individuals, right? Similarly with respect, right? We need to respect that other person's perspective, respect their viewpoint, right? Even if it does differ from another's or from ours, right? Wisdom is about, from a conflict management perspective, I think of wisdom in terms of your ability to listen, right? So the only way we're going to get the wisdom we need to solve this is through good listening, right? Bravery to me is about, from a conflict management perspective, is about still respecting the other individual and listening to them, but being also able to put yourself out there and be assertive as needed, right? Because conflict management isn't always about fully accommodating the other person, right? So that assertiveness comes from being brave in that moment, right? When I think of honesty, you know, we need to make sure that we are honest to our own perspective. It's really kind of close to truth, to Debwewin, right? That our worldview, our lens, everybody has a valid perspective. Everybody has a valid viewpoint, right? And we need to be honest to our own as well when we're in these sorts of situations, right? But still being humble to know that, you know, you never want to side with yourself. I saw that once in a social media post, you know, as much as you believe in your own idea, you don't want to close off your thoughts to other ideas, right? Because there, you'll be missing potentially some great things just because you're so focused on your own way of doing something or your own lens of looking at something, right? So I think all 7 of these things definitely are a piece when it comes to dealing with conflict in the workplace. So where I worked before, the grandfathers were part of our sort of organizational values. And, you know, I encourage you, if your First Nation doesn't have that, or your organization doesn't have that, if you, you know, consider that, right? Because in terms of a tool or preparation, if we have these sort of built into our organization already, it really is sort of a proactive approach to preventing the conflict in the first place, right? Which, as a health and safety person, that's what we're all about, is prevention, right? Can we get ahead of this? Can we be in front of this thing? Anyways, I'm not going to dwell on about the 7 grandfathers. I'm sure many of you know lots of things about the 7 grandfather teachings. But another really important one from a conflict perspective is our strawberry teachings, our Odamin, right? A little Anishinaabe lesson, if you don't know the language for strawberry Odamin, Oda means heart in Anishinaabe, right? And so really a better translation of Odamin is heartberry, right? And there's so many gifts, so many teachings that strawberry can give us when it comes to relationships and dealing with other people and potential for conflict, right? Even just looking at this strawberry right here, you can see strawberry is one of the few fruits that, you know, exposes its vulnerability, keeps its seeds on the outside, right? And that's such a huge piece of building a relationship with somebody, is being willing to be vulnerable with that other person, you know, and share sort of your shortcomings or your weaknesses or whatever that may be, right? And I think when I think about conflict, I think it's about, you know, acknowledging those shortcomings and or weaknesses and that humbleness to back to the 7 grandfathers, but knowing that really relationship is the most important piece here, not the outcome of whatever the issue is that you're going through or those 2 individuals may be going through. It's about the relationship. And that's absolutely true when we talk about a First Nation as an organization and as a community, because those lines, as I'm sure you know, often blur, right? We tend to work with our cousins and aunties and uncles. And so we have an issue outside of work and then it spills over into the workplace. You know, something happened at the Thanksgiving table and now we're talking about it in the lunchroom, in the band office or whatever, right? So important to kind of remember that the relationship is more important than whatever the issue is that you were sort of facing at the time, right? Another important teaching the strawberry gives us is the way it grows, right? I don't know if you've ever planted strawberries or have ever tried to plant just a single strawberry plant. You're not going to get much fruit at all from a single strawberry plant, right? They need to grow interconnected. They need to grow in a patch with many more plants. And human beings, we're the same, right? It doesn't matter if you're an extrovert or an introvert. We all really want connection, right? And maybe the connection isn't with, you know, a large social circle or a bunch of friends or whatever, but we all crave that connection, whether it's with your own individual immediate family or with your manager or with a colleague or whatever. We all strive for that connection, right? And that's what builds our relationships, right? And so, yeah, I just wanted to quickly highlight those couple of things that I truly believe are preventatives when we think about conflict management, right? So let's dive now into harassment and violence assessments. So I'm going to have to talk a little bit about legislation here, but remember, these assessments are about preparing for places where conflict may happen, right? If we can kind of get ahead of it, then we're not going to have the conflict, right? So what can we do to sort of assess and plan for and prep for these sorts of situations? And what can we put in place if we know we have these sort of vulnerable areas within our workplace, right? So looking at the federal legislation, the harassment and violence prevention regs, Section 8 says you need to identify the risk factors related to harassment and violence, right? And it kind of outlines these key areas where you need to consider those risk factors. So your culture, your organizational culture, coming back to those, do you have the 7 grandfathers embedded as an example, right? The conditions and activities within your organization and your structure. How does the organization look in terms of who has power, right? Well, leadership does, don't they? But after that, underneath the leadership, who has the power and how is the power sort of shifted around within the organization, right? External circumstances that you may be dealing with, right? And I'm going to focus in on that in just a moment here, because to me, that's sort of related to some specific risks that we should be sort of assessing and preparing for, right? Anything that's happened in the past related to harassment and violence, the design of your workplace. So in terms of, even something as simple as how well lit is a parking lot, right? That can be a preventative measure, having well-lit parking lots, for example, right? Or who has access and what are the access points within the organization? Is there a back door to the community center that's never locked or something like that, that anybody can come in through or whatever? Or is there a single entry point and everybody funnels through that one entry point, right? And then what you have in place from a mental health perspective in terms of psychosocial controls, right? Back to those 7 grandfathers, I have a colleague at WSPS. He was my friend back then, but he's now a director here. But several years ago, when I first met him, and I was still at RAMA, he said to me after I had done we were talking a lot about safety culture, and many health and safety professionals talk about that concept of culture and how do we build a good culture from a health and safety perspective, right? And we're really at an advantage when you live in or work in a First Nation community, right? Because there's already a culture. And many in the westernized world, there isn't usually, right? They have to build it, right? But we already have that homegrown. It's already there, right? So we really just are sort of sliding health and safety into it, or sliding psychosocial related mental health type controls into that existing culture, right? So it really does sort of tie back to those grandfather teachings, the strawberry teachings, or even medicine wheel teachings. Right? I'm a big fan of the vision wheel. I got it right here. Right? But all of those teachings can give us so much in terms of psychosocial controls that puts us at an advantage compared to the westernized world when it comes to managing conflict and dealing with harassment and or violence. Right? So there is something called an OSHCO tool that we use to sort of determine where specific risks may exist within our organization, right? And the specific risks are sort of very much related to those external circumstances a lot of the times when we think about, and also the conditions of our workplace, right? So although thinking about harassment and violence from a federal lens, there isn't really specific tools, good tools that help us with each of those things in Section 8. this tool, which is what all the provincial violence risk assessment tools are built on, of these 9 specific risk factors, is really a good way to approach even federally regulated workplaces when it comes to harassment and violence. So there are 9 risk factors. The first one is community-based settings, which I just sort of have set aside because if you work for a First Nation, you're in a community-based setting, right? That one's sort of a given, right? But let's go through each of the others because we could think about these within specific departments of the First Nation itself, right? Who has direct contact with the members of the community, right? Who is on the front lines? So thinking about like healthcare workers, right? Or maintenance workers that go into that band rental to fix that water heater or whatever, right? Those people that have direct contact with a customer, with that person that they're helping, or who may be upset about something, coming back to the conflict perspective, we need to consider those situations, right? And what do we have in place to protect those individuals? Handling cash. You know, if your finance department has lots of cash because that's the way they take payment and that's the way they deal with whatever loans and things like that for individuals, right? How are we dealing with that? Or if you have other departments like a gas bar or whatever that handle cash, craft shops, how are we planning for and assessing violence related to that cash handling, right? Departments who may work with unstable or volatile type clients, right? So I think about like a home and community care type department where you might have a PSW in a someone's home within the community, right? Or even thinking about like a family services or social services type department who might be dealing with an individual with addictions or an individual with other mental health potential issues, right? Do you have workers that work alone as part of their tasks? So that single, community health nurse that goes into that home to, I don't know, check for lice or whatever, right? Mobile workplace. So if you have situations where a specific, I don't know if there's any security in your First Nations that are sort of traveling around the First Nation, or maintenance workers that go to different areas within the First Nation to perform the work to help fix that rental or up or whatever, right? So when they're not always within your sort of set infrastructure, when they're out there in these remote locations, how are you assessing and dealing with those situations, right? High crime area. For those of you closer to large urban centers, Thunder Bay or whatever, right? How are you managing or dealing with that? Departments that may have valuables, even something like that could be culturally significant, regalia or something like that, right? And any departments that may be moving people around. So if you have medical transportation drivers that take someone into the hospital for dialysis or something like that, right? How are we sort of managing and dealing with these 9 situations within our First Nation or within our organization? And really, that's kind of what the assessment is about, is you kind of look at each of these individual situations and you say, well, where did this manifest? Where does this happen within my organization? Which of my departments, which of my positions have this specific factor, risk factor? And then for the ones that where it exists, well, what's in place to protect that individual? What do we have as a means to make them safer in case something does go wrong, right? And is it enough, whatever we have in place? Do we believe that that is all we can do reasonably to protect that individual? Or could we do more? And what else could we do? What else could we add to what is existing, right? So there are 2 tools that I wanted to show you very quickly. Ours and our sister organization, PSHSA, they're essentially the same tool. They are built on those 9 risk factors, and they also have elements for assessing your environment or your the workplace itself. The difference really is the PSHSA is an online fillable tool, and ours is kind of a booklet. So you can kind of, it's like a PDF, you can fill it out by hand if you like. So whichever you prefer. If you prefer to do something online, you could use the PSHSA. If you prefer hours, or prefer to do something by hand, you could use hours. But both of them are searchable. If you just type in PSHSA, violence risk assessment, or WSPS violence risk assessment, this tool would show up. But there's the QR codes if you want to scan or grab either of those things. I would like to show you what it looks like. So this is the PSHSA tool on their website. And what's cool about it is when you finished it, you can hit print and you've done your whole violence risk assessment, right? So you can do whatever the position is or the department, who you are, today's date, and it'll sort of put that into the footer of this document you're creating. So does this position or department have contact with our members? So if you say yes, it'll add more questions, right? But if you say no, then you can move on. Does this department handle cash, right? So for time's sake, I'll just go through the first one here, direct contact with customers or clients. So let's pretend it is a, I don't know, healthcare worker that goes into homes, helps community members that may have diabetes or something like that, right? So do the customers have direct physical access to the workers? So yes, because we're going to be in their home, right? So what is in place to protect that individual? Well, maybe they have a cell phone, right? They can call for help via that cell phone. Maybe there's some sort of a schedule. So everyone knows, like we know their location. We know they're at this house from this time to that time, and then they go to another house from that time to that time. So we sort of know what their day looks like and when they're expected back within our building at the end of the day to check in or whatever, right? Maybe that's all we have. And then we can kind of say, well, is that enough? Are we doing all we can, right? And there's some examples of what you could do. Well, these are kind of within the workplace itself. So it doesn't really work for my remote situation here. But if we were talking about people coming into the health center, do we have the reception area in a situation where it's visible and they can see the only entrance into the health center, right? Are the counters wide and there are large barriers that it'd be very difficult if a customer was upset to get at that receptionist, right? Or is it just a small desk and they could easily come around the desk to that receptionist as an example, right? So in terms of that physical access, can they contact them, right? Is sort of what we mean. So maybe there's other things we might want to do. Right? Can they call for immediate help if there's a violence or if it's likely to occur? So we're going to say yes, because they have that cell phone, that banned cell phone that's been given to them in that position in our scenario that I just made up on the spot here. But if we said no, it's okay, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make it safer so that they have that ability, right? Because that's a key piece in violence legislation, is that a worker is able to summon help if they need immediate assistance, right? So the ones that have asterisks in here mean that it's a higher risk. So what extra controls are you going to have for that individual when you check on the one that has an asterisk? You see how the no has this red asterisk here. So I'm going to say yes. Or we could say they have a cell phone, right? Back to within the health center. Is it clean, uncluttered, and welcoming, for the waiting room or for the front entrance area, the vestibule or whatever, however they come into that space, right? Maybe it isn't. Well, then maybe we need to figure out what we're going to do to make it a welcoming atmosphere. So someone's already agitated. We don't want to add to that, right? We don't want to have issues within our space as they come in that are going to further overwhelm them or further make them, in a position that they might want to cause conflict, as an example, right? But maybe we got a nice tidy space. We got posters up and welcoming. We got all these free things out in the front or something like that. So maybe it is welcoming, and we can kind of list what those things might be here, right? Is public access restricted? So this would be, is there a single front entrance into our health center, right? Or is there a back door that's unlocked and anyone can kind of come in through any which entrance they want, right? So restricted doesn't necessarily mean it's a locked door and somebody buzzes them in. It just means we've got sort of a way to control who's come in and we know who's come into that space, right? So maybe we do at our health center, or maybe you don't, right? And if you don't, what are you going to do to manage that risk of what could happen if someone was wanting to create conflict and could get into the space through a back door that was unlocked, for example? Well, lock it up. I think pretty simple answer, perhaps, right? But maybe yes. Right? And we can sort of explain there's only front entrance is the only opening, and there's reception right there, and they can see every individual that comes into the space, and that's our control. If a customer client becomes aggressive or violent, is there anything that they could use to hurt people within the space that they're in? So even something like a portable chair in the waiting room versus a chair that's sort of along a line of chairs or something, or bolted to the floor or something like that, right? What are we doing to sort of manage or deal with something like that, right? So maybe there is, and now we got to figure out how we're going to deal with that. Okay, we need to bolt these chairs down, or we need to replace these chairs with a sort of a line of chairs that are all interconnected, so you can't just pick up an individual chair and throw it at the wall or throw it at somebody, perhaps, right? So let's say no, we've got the good chairs. We can explain that here, perhaps. And there's no real other objects that could cause harm around. We keep, if there's areas where there might be more like examination type rooms or something like that that might have sharps or something like that, for example, we keep those locked up. They're behind a cupboard that is locked, or they're in a drawer that is locked, as another example of items or equipment that could be used to hurt people or cause harm, right? And you could explain all that, or if you needed to add more things, there's a space for you to sort of think about what that might be, right? And I don't know if I really highlighted it, but oh, here it is. Here, that's exactly what I was just talking about. But considerations: storing sharp or dangerous items so only workers have access, keeping public areas free of excess equipment or clutter that could be thrown, right? Are there designated places where we're going to meet with clients? So are there spaces within the health center where we only bring the clients into that room, right? And is there viewing? Can we see into that room, as an example? So if there was, somebody getting upset about something, someone outside could call for help, perhaps, if we needed to, right? Or can they hear them? Could they hear if somebody got loud within that space where they're meeting? A receptionist, as an example, right? Um, can workers safely store their personal belongings somewhere? So do they have a desk that they can lock their own personal items up within, or is there a locker or something like that, right? Anyway, I think you get the idea. But a very, very necessary tool to sort of plan for potential harassment or violent type situations, and then figure out what you have in place to prevent that conflict in the first place, right? It's all about being proactive, right? Okay, get back into this here. Well, we did the key Anishinaabe teachings. We talked about violence and harassment assessments. Let's talk about conflict now. So there's some common causes of conflict. And they really kind of have to do with these are 5 potential common causes of conflict. And, I was thinking about it. This is really a further assessment tool, right? You can think about situations or planned activities or departments or positions where these things might show up, right? And sort of think about it in terms of, well, what can we do in advance to prevent that from happening? What can we do to ensure that we're communicating in a good way and there's not going to be any misunderstanding about what our plan is to do with this grant we've just received or whatever, right? Intergenerational trauma, I don't have to tell you, 7 fires, we have dealt with a lot in our past, in our historical world, right? And a lot of that stuff can continue along our lineage through our genes, right? And so just dealing with that and knowing that we need to approach things with a trauma-informed mindset is another advantage we have as First Nation people, that we know that these things can exist and manifest in themselves, right? Because a thing about conflict is, or any individual that is upset about something, we very rarely or never know the whole story, right? We don't know what is making this person so upset about this particular issue, right? There's probably other things in their life that are also, causing them to be, anxious or stressed or whatever, that are playing into this particular issue in the moment, that this is the one that they can't take it anymore, and they feel they need to cause this conflict or potentially even lash out, right? Power struggles, authority, do we have clear, what's the word? Clear, I guess, organizational lines in terms of reporting structure, as an example, right? Does everyone know that this is how things get done in terms of motion to chief and council, as an example, right? And then approving that motion, right? Is there situations where there could be high stress or there could be a lot of emotion involved because this community event that we've planned deals with intergenerational trauma or deals with 60s scoop or whatever, anything that may have happened in the past or maybe happening currently, that someone we know some individuals are going to be in an agitated state about, right? And another very common one from a First Nation perspective is, are we sort of meeting the needs or expectations of that individual, right? It's very easy to be frustrated if you expected something and that's not what resulted, right? I'm sure all of us can relate to that, right? Let alone if there was a need, I needed this thing and now I don't have it, right? Easy to see that with things like housing issues, as an example, right? We expected this or we needed this and now we don't have it, we're going to be upset, right? Those sorts of things I think are easy to empathize with. So when we think about de-escalation, everything we've talked about up until here has been prevention, right? Proactive. What can we do ahead of this? What can we have in place to prepare for and prevent conflict in the first place, right? If we're here at de-escalation, we're past that. We're reacting now. It's almost like emergency response. How are we dealing with this issue in the moment? Because all of our proactive things have not worked, or we haven't done enough proactive things, perhaps, right? But sort of the key concepts is being respectful, right? We want to make sure that, again, we are focused on our zagiwewe and our love for that individual, right? The respect. We're honoring sort of that relationship, and that is key and that is priority in this interaction, right? We really need to focus on our listening skills when it comes to conflict de-escalation as well, right? Because, like I said, we don't necessarily know the whole story. We can't, a real danger in conflict de-escalation is to jump to conclusions or to assume you know what that person or that individual needs, right? You really need to sort of listen and make sure you're trying your best to try to understand why they're so upset about whatever it is that they're upset about, perhaps, right? Kind of coming back to, using that wisdom grandfather, right? To use that, to listen well, to build our own wisdom about that situation, right? So, active listening, we talk about active listening in the Western world in terms of just listen, don't think about what you're going to say next, right? And that's part of it, but I like to think of active listening as really trying to understand why that individual is saying that message or saying that thing in the way that they're saying it, right? Where they might be coming from, what they might be dealing with or going through, to have that reaction, have that messaging or whatever that communication is that they're using, right? And then when we do speak, we're going to use empathy, right? We're going to be relaxed. We're going to keep calm ourselves. We're going to use simple language, right? We're going to make sure that we are really trying to use questions or to help us further understand their position, their worldview, their perspective, whatever it is that might be keeping them or causing that upset. Right? And this is kind of very much tied to that, is promoting psychosocial safety, which is a fancy westernized health and safety way of saying we want to make sure that that individual feels safe, feels comfortable to tell us what their needs are, to tell us why they're upset or what's going on within them or from their past or whatever that may be, right? So it's about being inclusive, right? And not thinking about blame or judgment, right? It's about focusing on the issue and not on the individual, because that relationship is so important, right? So back to regulating our own emotions, kind of along the lines of that listening, we still want to keep calm ourselves. You know, even if it's something they're saying is might make you upset, you got to sort of quiet that, right? And stay composed and grounded yourself so that you are not going to agitate them or make the situation worse, right? The whole thing is to calm the situation down, right? Whatever we can do to calm it down, we want to do, right? So if they're upset about something and now you're upset about it, or you're upset about it in the opposite position, that's not de-escalation, that's escalation, right? That's going to cause things to potentially spiral out of control, right? You know, when we talk about empathize, I think that's part of the strawberry teachings, part of what makes us human, to be honest, is sort of knowing or asking questions to sort of understand that person's point of view. I know I've said that already, but that's so important when it comes to conflict management, right? Because if you can sort of understand why they feel the way they feel, and then you voice that to them, and you do it genuinely, they should no longer have a reason to sort of lash out at you. You're no longer my teenagers say, the ops. You're an ally to that individual now, right? You're someone that they can confide in, someone that they can trust, someone that might be able to provide help to them, right? So that empathizing is so key to that sort of a situation when it comes to de-escalation, right? So a really cool phrase I've heard about conflict is we really need to think of it as a puzzle and not a battle, right? We need to solve or put the pieces of this puzzle together and not try and win this war, right? And there's a few different tools we can use to sort of solve that puzzle, right? So accommodation, compromise, and collaboration are a couple of those tools. When we think about accommodation, we're sort of talking about a lose-win type scenario, right? We're saying that the person is going to be very unassertive, the person that's going to do the accommodation, and really just give in and let the other individual have whatever they need, right? Compromise is kind of a partial win, right? It's like, well, let's meet in the middle. Here's my perspective, here's your perspective. Can we sort of find a common ground, or can we find one thing that we can agree on? We're not going to both get what we want, but let's deal with this one thing, right? So there's some assertiveness with compromise, right? But then collaboration is about being fully assertive, right? It's about I see you, I see your perspective. Here's what I want to add to that. Let's build something together. It's obviously the best way to do it. It's the win-win, right? It's my favorite of the three and the one I want to touch on or focus on a little bit more. But if you think about how the seven clan teachings and how we governed since traditional times, it was always through collaboration, right? The families of the community would come together. First family would say an issue, another family would sort of add on to that. We'd have our circle. Each clan would speak. We'd go around twice. 7 twice is 8. My dad always says, I don't know if you've ever heard that teaching, go around that circle twice, let each clan speak a second time after they've heard the first position of everybody, and an eighth way presents itself. That's really a piece of all those individual 7 ways, 7 lenses into that situation or issue or problem for the community. And it was really a beautiful way of doing things compared to any other situations, any other way of doing things in government even, right, to be honest. So when do you use each of these things? Accommodation, if it's way more important to one individual or another. If we want to focus on that relationship or building a relationship and we just want a quick fix, quick solve, that's when we might go with an accommodation, right? Compromise, if we need to get this done now, right? Collaboration tends to take a bit of time to invest in it, right? So we don't always have that time, right? Sometimes the issue is time sensitive. There's a deadline looming to get whatever it is accomplished that we need to accomplish, right? If each side sort of has equal power related to the situation, they have very sort of mutually exclusive goals. Any math geeks in here? That's a term from my math background. And we just need a temp fix, right? We want to sort of solve this issue right now. It may not last, but we need to solve it right now because this deadline is coming up. Right? Those are sort of situations where that might lend themselves to compromise. Collaboration, my favorite of them, is when it's a very important issue, right? We need long-term resolution. The relationship of the individuals at odds matters. We want their relationship to be preserved. And especially when multiple perspectives and viewpoints will add to this, will help us solve this. And we have different perspectives and different ideas to deal with whatever the situation is. Right? So let's play a game here. You tell me in the chat, or you can shout it out if you like. I got a couple of examples. You tell me which one you think makes the most sense for that example, okay? So we got a scheduling conflict. 2 different groups want to use the hall this week to have an elder do some teachings. What would be the best way to approach that between accommodation, compromise, or collaboration? Throw it in the chat or shout it out.
Compromise.
Okay, yeah, compromise. Got another thought on collaboration. Collaboration, compromise, compromise, compromise. Appreciate you, Noreen, for saying it aloud. Anybody else, don't be shy. Put yourself out there. Oh, Philippa's good with either way. I like that too. Yeah, and I do think it could lend itself to collaboration. It really sort of depends on the space, I guess, right? But compromise to me makes more sense for this sort of a situation, right? Because we have limited time, right? It's got to be this week, right? Maybe if both individuals want to use it this week and they both wanted it Wednesday, well, can one use it Wednesday early afternoon and the other use it Wednesday later afternoon or something like that? So that really is a compromise, right? We can't give it to you both for the full afternoon. How can we sort of make it so you're both going to be sort of happy, that partial win in that sort of a situation, right? But collaboration could be possible if you have the right space for it, right? Sure, yeah, it could be accommodation. Another thing I want to say about these 3 different approaches is they're not black and white. They're very fluid, right? There's not defined hard borders between them, right? Sometimes there's elements of one within another, right? And sort of the lines can be blurred in terms of one might present itself a lot higher than the others, but there still might be elements of the others. So I think that's an important point to think about. So thank you for saying that, Beth. How about this one? We got 2 families in need of a house. We've only got 1 rental unit available, but one family has an elder on dialysis and the home is close to where they can get their care. What would be the best approach in that sort of a situation? I feel like Beth, you gave it away. Oh, I like that thought too, Don. Compromise in the now, in the short term, but let's think of a collaborative approach for the future? How are we going to deal with this if it crops up again? Back to that shared space situation. That's an awesome idea. I love that, Don. Yeah, everybody's hitting it in the chat. Yeah, this is definitely an accommodation situation, right? Let's do one more, and then I'll get to my last activity here. We're planning a community feast, and we've got 2 cooks that are going to create the menu of this feast. And there's a big disagreement between them on how that menu is going to look. One wants all traditional foods, fish. One wants more pastas, modern dishes, perhaps. How could we approach that sort of a situation? Ooh, fusion. I like that. Collaboration, create fusion dishes. That's an awesome idea, right? We have bannock with spaghetti sauce on it or something. I don't know. Garlic scone. Is that a thing? That's a great idea. Hope I'm saying your name right, Katya. Yeah, compromise, collaboration, and I could go either way on this one. Yeah, Philippa, I do think it could be either or sort of a combo of them, right? If it is a situation where one wants the full menu one way and the other wants a full menu their way, well, let's do half and half, right? That would be compromise. But yeah, the fusion idea is, well, what can we do to sort of blend our ideas together? That would be the way to achieve collaboration. So I guess if you had longer term, like if you had a bigger duration out, collaboration might lend itself. Like if we knew the feast was, in the spring and we're planning it now, let's focus on that collaborative effort. But if we're planning a feast for, November 1st, today, well, maybe we're going to have to go with compromise. We might not have the time to invest in figuring out what that collaboration looks like, for example, right? All right, skip this one. So keys to collaboration is you want to focus on shared goals. You want to focus on what you both have in common and less on your individual positions or your individual lenses, right? What are your common interests? And that's back to those clan teachings and the way we governed, right? There would often be disagreements in our communities, I'm sure, but you still got to say, well, I don't like what the Bear Clan said completely, but is there something in there that I can take and I can still build on, right? Keeping that open dialogue, I'm sure Anishinaabe people, we love to talk, right? We love telling stories, and that's a key piece to collaboration as well. Sharing the full story, not just your view on this or your lens on this particular issue that you're dealing with, right? Working together to sort of co-create the best type of a solution, right? Instead of one side imposing a solution on the other, right? And doing it with equal voices, making sure that we're respecting each individual's background, perspective, lens on that particular situation, right? And we already have the perfect tool to do this in Anishinaabe communities, right? A sharing circle is the ultimate guide to collaboration, right? You pass that feather around, you let every individual share their viewpoint, and then you send it around again a second time, right? So that we can sort of build the best way, the best approach to whatever this particular situation is that we might be dealing with, right? So I got one more activity here. I need a couple of volunteers. I need 3 volunteers. Who wants to volunteer for me here? Don't all raise your hands at once. Yeah. Cue crickets noise.
I will. I'm okay.
Awesome. You got Noreen. I got 1 volunteer. I need 2 more.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. 1 more? Who's my 3rd victim? I mean volunteer. Come on. Somebody else that's on camera, maybe. Aaron, Sandra, Philippa, Elaine. Any takers?
All right, I will.
Okay, I was
Awesome.
going to, but it's okay.
All right. So we're planning a community garden, okay? Noreen's perspective is she wants all traditional medicines. She wants us to plant sage and sweetgrass and cedar, and she wants us to focus on our 4 main medicines so that every individual has access to those medicines for their own healing, okay? Betsy says, let's do 3 sisters. Let's plant our corn, bean, squash the way our ancestors did so that they will grow together in a good way, and we don't even have to worry so much about the garden because they'll keep themselves, right? And Philippa says, no, I want carrots. Right? I want onions. She wants more modern vegetables, perhaps. Okay. So in the first round, here's what we're going to do. Okay. Noreen, you're going to start. And I want you to kind of give your viewpoint on why you want the traditional medicines, just 1 sentence, okay? And then Betsy, you're going to respond, but when you respond, I want you to start with no because. And then same with you, Philippa. After Betsy gives her viewpoint, you're going to respond and jump in with no because and give your viewpoint, okay? A little acting here. Okay, go for it, Noreen, you start us off. Give us your position on your traditional medicines.
I would like to plant our garden with the traditional medicines because our traditional medicines are hard to find now because we have to go deeper into the woods to go get them because it has to be pure and untouched by cars or anything. So it's harder for us to find our medicines. So that's why I want to plant them.
Okay, miigwech, Noreen. Betsy.
No,
No,
but
I'm saying no to that because we need to start from somewhere. Not everybody has experience with gardening, and the easiest process would be for us to try to do the 3 sisters and provide the teachings with that.
Okay, Philippa.
I can unmute. I'm going to say no because I think we need to go with modern vegetables that have high yields because we need to provide food for the community. And so if we planted things that we know are going to grow well and commercially available produce that everyone recognizes, it'll be a better for everybody in the community.
Right. So everyone, you can sort of see how quickly that conversation sort of died, right? In terms of the negativity and how you could easily see this is going to become more and more polarized as we kind of continue. Even if we went around again, people are going to dig in, right, into their position and give further argument as to why their position makes the most sense, right? So I want to do the exact same activity, except this time, after Noreen starts, you can just give a short form this time, Noreen. Betsy, you're next. You're going to start your sentence with yes and then jump in with your perspective. Okay, so Noreen, start us off.
I'm going to plant. I would like to plant the traditional medicines in our garden.
Okay, Betsy.
I love that idea. And I think that we could plant your medicines along with my medicines, and we could have an awesome time doing all of these teachings week after week as we're weeding everything out.
Beauty. Philippa.
Yes, I agree. I think having the traditional medicines and the 3 sisters there, in addition to modern vegetables with high yields, would encourage the community to come together to the garden and work together to grow everything.
It's almost like I planned this exercise. Yeah. You can see that's another beautiful tool, that yes and tool. It's like, yes, I love that, and I want to add this to it. And that's the way we governed traditionally. That's how the clan system worked, if you know anything about our 7 clans, right? So that's another tool we can use besides the sharing circle, is that yes and approach when we're trying to focus on collaborative efforts, right? So what questions have you got? That's all I got to say. Does anybody have any questions about any of that stuff? I presented a lot of stuff from a lot of different viewpoints, but what have you got? I give 30 seconds here. No. As much time as you need. Who's got a question for me about any of the stuff we talked about? Go ahead, Noreen.
No, it's not a question more. It's back to being back to reality and everything else, because I think we just got too quick with just setting our forms, just putting check boxes in our forms, and not really doing the compromise, or even before we get I just think it was a more refined a reminder for me now.
we always took our time, right? And you think about traditional ways of doing things, right? And in our westernized society, our colonialization has forced us to speed things up. So I think it is important to take that breath and sort of step back, and that can definitely help with a lot of things. So thank you for sharing that, Marie.
I would just like to thank you for starting off with the strawberry teachings, because in the way that we do the work, it's more or less coming from the heart.
Yeah, absolutely, right? We're providing service to our own community. What could be more from the heart than that, right? No matter what you do for your community, right? You're helping your community. I love it. Beautiful, Betsy. Miigwech. Okay, well, let me just recap here. As I said, preparation is the key to managing conflicts. Think about your Anishinaabe teachings, or I see a Niawan in there, Haudenosaunee, going around backwards. That's backwards to us, but whatever. No, you have a valid perspective and a valid way of doing things too. Do your assessments before those issues happen, right? Think about what controls you have in place in advance and what you could add to them to further improve, and use those tools, accommodation, compromise, and especially collaboration in those situations when conflict may appear, right? Sharing circles, yes and approach. Those things are all going to help us in managing conflict within our communities. So, Chimigwech, everybody. I appreciate your time this morning.
You have a
One-
second? I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Colette.
Okay, so my question is, what advice do you have if you're trying to use this approach, but one of the parties, or more of the party, well, at least one of the parties, refuses to join in? Do you have any suggestion?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Let me put that out to the group before I say my piece. Anybody else have a thought about that? So somebody doesn't want to participate in the circle or the yes and approach. How could you get them to be involved? As I assume what you're sort of asking, Colette.
Yeah, something like that. Or, yeah, what pre-work do we have to do to make sure that we're all going to be on the same, or at least trying to get to the same place?
I love that. That totally changes what I was going to say. The pre-work idea, right? Because I think it kind of comes back to embedding our grandfathers in our organization, embedding the ways we did things traditionally with our modern ways of doing things, right? And making sure people know in advance, well, we're going to have a circle. If our department is at odds on how to allocate our budget or our resources, our grant money, let's have a circle to determine that. That's it. Everybody knows that in advance, right? So they know in advance that's the approach, and they'll be more likely to participate if it's not sort of sprung on them, perhaps, right? So that's a great point. Advanced pre-work. That's my suggestion, I guess. Making sure you kind of establish those norms ahead of time.
Thanks.
Can I just interject or
Sure.
just come to it? So if one party is like hesitant or not willing to participate, I would just most likely meet with parties separately and discuss what their expectations, both positive and negative, and maybe go over what the goal is, and to ensure that all parties are comfortable with that. Sometimes when we don't have those realistic, or again, going into the unknown, that's when we're so hesitant and not to proceed with things. So maybe in that situation, just again, more communication, more understanding, a little more, I guess, love in terms of the grandfather teachings, and a little more patience as to the party who is hesitant. And again, just being more communicating, and I think understanding is such a big thing when it comes to communication. And when people don't have that knowledge, they just kind of stop themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Miigwech for sharing, Aaron. That's another common approach to conflict management, especially in the westernized world, is you sort of have a mediator that meets individually and builds almost a contract for each individual to sign. That's really focused on shared goals versus positions, right? So that is another potential approach. Beautiful. Well said, Aaron. All right, I got one final question to everybody. What's one thing you heard this morning that you want to take back and share with someone else at your organization? Throw it in the chat or say it aloud. One quick thing you want to take back. What's your own, this is your call to action for yourself. What can you take back to your organization? Oh, Miigwech, Strawberry Teachings, Beth. Love it. Odaman. Thank you for starting us off, Beth. Well, those are populating in the chat. Everybody populated in the chat. The yes and Miigwech, Caitlin. You can see our canoes are back on the dock. Everybody's safe and sound after our canoe trip, right? Which was the whole goal when we started off on that journey, right? Oh, Miigwech, Valerie, I love that too. Everybody has a valid perspective, right? Everybody has a valid point of view, right? And emotions can cloud that, absolutely. It's a puzzle to solve, not a battle to win. Yes, the 7 grandfathers, Miigwech, Leona. Oh, Miigwech, Filipa, accommodation, compromise, collaboration. Yes. Yes, and Beth. She's adding more. Miigwech, Beth. Love it. Ooh, good heart and open mind. Love that too. Miigwech, Sandra. Awesome. Well, I really want to thank all of you and say Miigwech again. I had a blast this morning. You know, GovernWise has my contact information, but it's just my name, drew.douglas@wsps.ca. If you want to have any further conversations, I love talking about the intersection of Anishinaabe and health and safety or psychosocial things, respect, relationships. I love those sorts of things. So I'm happy to have further conversations if you want to have further conversations with me. Right? But yeah, GovernWise has lots of other great resources as well. So, you know, stay in touch with them. And yeah, I guess it's Ball Mapi then. Ball Mapi, everybody.